Okay, today I'm going to talk about arguments. In philosophy, it's very important to understand what arguments are because that's what philosophy deals with. It deals with conceptual uh, things, and it's constantly making arguments. So you cannot evaluate an argument unless you know what to look for. So I'm going to go over 7 basic tests that you can apply to any argument to see if it's a good argument. I wrote this word on the whiteboard. It's an acronym. An acronym is a word where each letter of the word stands for a concept. So before I get into each of what the letters mean, let me just briefly review what an argument is. An argument is composed of 2 parts, and your book talks about this: premises and a conclusion. So, and the premises basically are reasons to believe that the conclusion is true. A good argument is an argument where the conclusion actually follows from the premises. Okay, so what are the 7 tests that you can apply to any argument to see whether it's a good argument? I won't start with the Q, I'll come back to that a little later. I'll start with the U. For an argument to be good, it has to be written clearly. It has to be written clearly so people can understand you, what your argument is. So you can think of the U as standing for right, so people can understand you, or right understandably, right? So meaning your sentences should make sense. So when somebody reads your sentence, they know what it means. And you say, well, of course you have to do that. But a lot of people do not write so people can understand them. And so when you read the sentences, you have no idea what they mean. It's probably because the grammar is just, messed up. So a lot of courses, that's why at universities and colleges, a lot of courses have prerequisites where before you can get into the course, you have to take an English course, right? So you learn basic grammar and you learn how to write essays. And so you learn how to write so you can present arguments where the thesis is clear and the person reading your paper can at least understand what you're saying. And they may disagree with what you say, but at least they understand what you say. So this is probably the single most important thing in any argument. You need to write so people can understand you. There's no point in wasting your time writing an essay and then somebody reads it and they say, well, I have no idea what you meant, right? So write so people can understand you. And when you analyze somebody else's essay, if you can't understand them, then you're going to say it's not a good argument. E, R, and the T refer to evidence. So in every argument, you are presenting evidence to support a conclusion. The evidence is supporting a conclusion. The E refers to enough evidence. Okay, so basically the principle is here, the more evidence, the better. Think of like a jury trial. Somebody's being tried for a crime, and the state is prosecuting that person. Okay, now the jury has to decide whether the person is guilty or not. Well, if you're the prosecuting attorney, what you want to do is provide evidence to make your case, and the more evidence, the better. Okay, so basically the principle is the more, the better. So provide enough evidence. E is enough, but the evidence you provide has to be relevant. It has to actually deal with what you're talking about. There's no point in just giving a whole bunch of evidence out there and that has nothing to do with what you're trying to prove. So make sure the evidence is relevant. For example, if let's say you're arguing whether the death penalty is constitutional, and you're arguing, let's say you're trying to argue that it's constitutional, and one of the pieces of evidence that you present is that it lowers the crime rate, decreases the crime rate. Well, that's evidence, but it's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with what you're trying to prove. You're trying to prove whether the death penalty is constitutional. The fact that it lowers the crime rate has nothing to do with whether it's constitutional. So what you need to do is to, start quoting from the Constitution and start showing that the Constitution actually means that the death penalty is constitutional. So make sure your evidence is relevant. The T stands for true. The evidence you present should be true. For example, if you're going to quote the Constitution, well, you better quote it correctly. Don't misquote it, because it will not be true evidence. So the evidence you present has to be enough, it has to be relevant, it has to be true. That's if your argument fails in any of these areas, it's not going to be a good argument. All right, so the O stands for opposing viewpoint. I'll just put opposing. The O stands for the opposing viewpoint. When you make an argument, you need to consider objections. So you can also say the O stands for objections. You need to consider the opposing viewpoint. You need to consider what somebody might say who disagrees with you. And then you need to answer those objections. You need to consider the opposing viewpoint and refute it. Because if you don't refute it, your argument will not work. So the O stands for consider opposing viewpoints. If you don't consider them, someone else will, definitely. So write so people can understand you, provide enough evidence, relevant evidence, true evidence, and consider opposing viewpoints. The L stands for logic. Argue logically. So I'll just put the word logic here, L-O-G-I-C. So your argument should be logical, or I'll put logical. Your argument should be logical, meaning the conclusion actually logically follows from the premises. Okay. And I'll talk a little about that in a second after I talk about this one first. I'll come back to this one. But your argument should be logical. Even if all this stuff is true and your argument is not logical, your argument will fail. So when you're analyzing any argument, if it's not logical, it fails. It's that simple. Okay, the Q stands for qualify. So when you make statements, make sure you qualify them. Probably I think one of the most important words for qualifying a statement is the word probably. Instead of saying, for example, that something is always the case, it's probably better. I just said probably. It's usually the case that you should say the word probably. Scientists are very careful in this area. I mean, scientists don't say a lot of scientific theories. A lot of scientists believe that a theory is true, but they don't really know with 100% certainty. So if you push, you'll say they usually will say it's probably true. Like take for example the Big Bang theory. You can't say with 100% certainty that it's true. It may not be true. I mean, some evidence may come out that scientists will reject that theory. So scientists will say, it's probably true. It's very likely that it's true. Probably, likely. Also avoid words like never, always, none, or all. Unless you know that it is all, avoid those words. Avoid the word never. It never rains here. Well, how do you know it never rains? How do you know it's not going to rain tomorrow? Or all boys, little boys like to play baseball. Well, all little boys? You mean there's not one little boy in the world that doesn't like to play baseball? Yeah, I'm sure there is. So you might want to qualify your statement. Most little boys like to play baseball. Okay? So qualify your statements. That's one of the most important words, probably is one of the most important words for qualification. So these are the 7. Let me, for just a couple of minutes and then I'll end this little video. Let me say a little about the word, the L word for logical. So let me give you an example of an argument that, let's say I say this, well, let me say another one. I'll say, if today is, if today is Monday, there is a test. There is a, I shouldn't have done this, but there is a test. Okay, and then I say, let's say, then I say, that's one reason. The second reason will be there is a test. And then you conclude, well, if today is Monday, there's a test, there is a test, and then you conclude, therefore, today is Monday. Therefore, today is Monday. Today is Monday, right? Okay. Now, that is a terrible argument because it's illogical, okay? If today is Monday, there is a test. That doesn't mean today is Monday. It could be Tuesday, it could be Wednesday. There could be a test on Tuesday or Wednesday. This argument is illogical. So even if this is true and this is true, that does not follow. If I substitute letters for the sentences, if I say, if today is Monday, call that P, and there is a test as Q, the argument would be if P, then Q. If P, then Q, there is a test, that's Q, and therefore P, the conclusion is P. If P, then Q, Q, P, any argument that has that form is illogical. That's an illogical, that form of argument is illogical. And your book talks about this, so that's this is definitely one of the forms you need to be familiar with. Okay, so that's all basically I want to say today. QUERTOL it's an acronym for the 7 things you need to look for when you analyze an argument. Qualify your statements, write so people can understand you, provide enough evidence, relevant evidence, true evidence, consider opposing viewpoints, and argue logically. That's all for today. Thank you.